I've seen a lot of politicians on both sides of the aisle point across the aisle and say, oh, well, we can't get anything done because of them. I mean, we've worked together. Imagine us going to our boss and saying, we really can't get anything done because Skyler, I don't really like him. And, he has a different idea of how to do things. And we're just going to sit here and not do anything.
Welcome back. It's Skyler with Conversations, where we share stories, my connections, and key learnings in hopes of giving back to the next generation. I'm here with Juan Dominguez, who's currently on a Senate run, West Point graduate, combat veteran, coach, business leader, and friend. So good to see you, Juan.
Great to see you. I need you to do my marketing.
Yeah, it's I know we got a lot to get to today, but I really just want to start one. I've done some research. Obviously, we've known each other for almost 15 years, but I'd love to hear just from your perspective a little bit about your parents' journey to the United States from Cuba and really how that helped shape you.
You're right. Both my parents emigrated to the United States in the late 50s, early 60s. They all had slightly different journeys, or they both had slightly different journeys. My dad went here to go to college at the University of Miami. My mom went here and came here and she became a working person, right? Yeah. So, she worked in a textile plant, a factory, and she was brought over by some family members who, the community was very strong. She lived with her aunt until she could get her own place, and she got her own place with a couple of friends. But they had a tough time leaving Cuba with basically the clothes on their back and starting a new life here in America, which was, pretty cool. My dad, I remember him telling me that he had a $7 suit and his buddy had a $7 suit, and they would just flip suits every other day, so it looked like they had two suits.
Talk to me a little bit about West Point. So obviously, I know you graduated from West Point. I'd love to hear how those experiences impacted not only your life, but also your career and how you applied some of those lessons.
So, West Point was an interesting journey because it was really my dad's dream for me to go to West Point. And we filled out all the paperwork, me thinking, hey, I'm never going to get in this place.
Yeah.
And so I was going to go to the University of Miami like he did, right?
Yeah.
On the beach and study oceanography or something. And my backup was Rutgers University, the state school. And long story short, you have to get accepted there and you have to get a nomination from a member of Congress. You need both. Some people get one and not the other. And one day, I remember clear as day, it was January of my senior year, my little brother ran into basketball practice. And he had a letter in his hand. He's like, you're going to West Point. You're going to West Point. And my dad's an engineer, and he's very detail-oriented. And when we got home, he looked at the letter. He goes, this has got to be a hoax because there's typos in here. And he never thought that a congressman would allow a letter to go out with typos. And I was like, okay, I got accepted, I got nominated, but it doesn't mean that I'm going, right? I've got time to make a decision. Yeah. And it was such a small town, 8,000 people. The next day in homeroom, they found out, and it's like, lunch today is this, the athletic events are that, and Juan's going to West Point. And I was like, well, I guess that seals that deal. So, yeah. And so the way it shaped me was, it's a very humbling experience when you go from being one of the top people in your high school, athletically, academically, and you go there and there's 1,000 people in your class, and before long you're kind of like in the middle, right? Yeah. Because everything's graded, everything's ranked, and you just have to decide that, hey, I'm going to take something out of this. You work hard. I worked hard to be 500th out of 1,000th in the class. It wasn't easy, and but really what it taught me was discipline. We've got a motto: duty, honor, country. Yeah. A lifelong commitment of service to your nation. That's why I'm running for the Senate. And, a cadet will not lie, cheat, or steal, nor tolerate those who do. So for a young 18-year-old to go there and kind of have all of this thrown onto them, you grow up quick. So that's what I learned there, to grow up quick.
Well, I can tell you, even in sitting here and talking to you and Cheyenne, I mean, you still got that same spirit in terms of how you're approaching this campaign, which is exciting. I want to ask you a little bit about, obviously being an officer in the Army, and what's one thing that you would say you're most proud of from that time period?
I was going to be stationed in Fort Hood, Texas. Instead, because of some different things, I ended up being in Fort Benning, Georgia. Fort Benning, Georgia was a school brigade, so we never thought we would get deployed if something happened. And I had career soldiers and non-commissioned officers, sergeants there that thought, they were there for a specific reason. They really didn't want to be deployed. They had family lives and things of that nature. And all of a sudden, Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait, and the 24th Infantry Division, which was out of Savannah, Georgia, was going, and they had 2 active duty brigades, and the 3rd brigade was a National Guard brigade that rounds out that unit in wartime.
Yeah.
Well, they went and trained for about a month, and they were like, if we send these guys, it's not going to be good for them. And so they said, okay, who's the closest brigade in Georgia? And they're like, oh, the 18th Infantry Regiment. So that's how we went. And even when we touched down in country, a lot of our sergeants thought it was a drill that we would just touch down and come back. And I'm like, guys, there's no going back. So that was interesting, deploying there. And I think the one thing I learned very quickly as a young lieutenant was you have to trust. You don't know it all. It doesn't matter where you went to school. Doesn't matter how much training you've had. There were sergeants in my unit that had been there 15, 20 years, and they knew a lot more about how to lead soldiers in the field than I did. And luckily, they took me under their wing and taught me, and I learned a lot from those sergeants. So similar to business, you can't come in and think you have all the answers. You got to trust your people, learn from them, and then that's how you build a team.
I saw that on display many times during our time together. We always used to say Juan knows how to build teams, and knows how to put them together. And you put the right people in place and watch amazing things happen. Obviously, I've known you from business, and we've been friends for quite a few years. But to see this transition, and now you're running for Senate, right? Mm-hmm. And to me, I got off the plane yesterday. I'm in D.C., and I kept thinking about when I was a kid, when I was 19, 20 years old, and I would look up at these buildings, and I would think, how can I work in one of these? How can I want to have a suit, I want to have a tie. And to me, that was success, right? And that was my goal. And one day, we're working out of the biggest building in Philly and living the dream. But for me, yesterday, as I'm walking around D.C. and I'm looking at the White House and I'm looking at, these different buildings, and I'm just thinking about you in this race. And, it's really inspiring because to me, it made me think, man, guys like us could end up in places like this, right? And so I want to ask you, what does that even consist of, what you're up against right now and running for Senate? What does that even mean, and how do you go about it?
If we could take a step back, when I came out of the Gulf War and I moved back to my hometown of 8,000 people, we were considered heroes, right? I don't know that I did anything necessarily heroic there, right? We did our job, and still to this day, bringing those 40 soldiers back from Iraq and Saudi Arabia, to me, was one of the top things I've ever done in my life, right?
Yeah.
It's something that brought me incredible satisfaction. When I got out of the Army, I ran for town council in my hometown. I won with 65% of the vote. I worked really hard, hit all the doors a couple times, and I was in it for all the wrong reasons, right? So someone asked me to run, I ran, and after winning, I was like, okay, how can I become the governor of New Jersey? That was my goal. Forget about what I was going to do. I just had it mapped out. In 2 years, I'm going to run for that. And wouldn't you know it, in my next race, I lost. And it was coming down to earth. It's probably one of the biggest failures of my life. And, I moved on, I got married, I had children, I built a career, and I never really thought that I would go back to it until the last few years, where I've seen a lot of divisiveness in our country. Yes. I've seen a lot of politicians on both sides of the aisle point across the aisle and say, oh, well, we can't get anything done because of them. I mean, we've worked together. Imagine us going to our boss and saying, we really can't get anything done because Skyler, I don't really like him, and he has a different idea of how to do things, and we're just going to sit here and not do anything. Where does that happen, right? It seems like only in DC. So I thought, as January hit around, it was probably the first time in my life that I felt like I was talking to God directly. And I know some people, everyone has spirituality or they believe in different things. And even though I believed in God, I never really thought I had a conversation with him, but I just had this calling every day for a couple of months. Hey, you need to be doing something bigger with your life. And then our senator was retiring, and I thought, well, maybe that's it. And I told Cheyenne, and we're idea guys, right? So we have great ideas. We think all the time. And I said, hey, it's a great idea. I'm going to run for Senate.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, it's not going to be a yes, on this one conversation.
Yeah.
This is a big thing.
Yeah.
It impacts our family. We've got boys, right? And they're in school. And so we talked about it for months. And finally she said, you know what? You were born for this.
Yeah.
You're in it for the right reasons. And my reasons this time were not about me. They were about wanting to end child hunger and poverty in this country as we know it. And we can get into more specifics on that, but that's why I'm running. Because we are the land of plenty, and there should be no reason why in this country children go hungry, or we have 25% of our citizens in Maryland and in America at or below the poverty line. And that's when I look at those big buildings in DC, I'm like, how can those folks do more to help these people that we're leaving behind? We can't leave anybody behind.
Speaking about your wife, for me being here 5 minutes and seeing how she supports you and your vision, and even just hearing her say, when we win this thing, right? Like that was, it's just awesome to see that support. You don't see that every day. We're
in it to win it. And she is my biggest champion and my best friend and the love of my life. So without her, she'd really be a better candidate than me. All things being told.
Who was it that said, behind every great man is an even better woman?
But behind every great woman, there's an even better man, right? I mean, you can't do it without, our team is her and our two boys.
Yeah.
The only request of my 11-year-old who you met was that, hey, Dad, you still got to coach my Little League team. And I said, you got it. I still do.
I know you mentioned you went back to business and you created this incredible career. And obviously that's where I got to see you really shine. What key learnings are you going to take from the business world and your time in leadership that you're going to apply to politics?
I have to tell you, thanks for affording me this great opportunity to chat with you today. And it wouldn't be right of me to say anything without acknowledging how great of a leader you are and how awesome you were to have on a team. I always picture people that I work with as teammates. Someone might be in charge of that team, the captain, but the only way we're successful is working together. So the things that I will bring to the role are, you've got to listen, right? As a leader, and I've learned, and it took me longer in life than it should have, but the biggest lesson I can ever give anyone that wants to be a good leader is listen to your people and build a foundation of trust, and always be transparent with them. And if you can just bring those simple ingredients together, your people know more about their particular job than you ever will, right? Particularly the higher you go in business. And if they can trust you, if they can feel that you have their back, you can do incredible things.
And just thinking of teams, obviously, we work together with a college internship program that we launched across the country, and I primarily led the Big South, so the Atlanta region. Mm-hmm. And, that was one of the most magical summers of my life. And I think about my career, that propelled my career. I got a ton of exposure to the success we had, and ultimately it just took off from there.
Yep.
And, there was a moment that I wanted to thank you for that you probably don't even remember, but, I'm a new manager. I'm young. I think I was, 25 years old. And you showed up to visit, and I wanted to have this great visit, and I'd gotten in, got everything set up. It was early, excited for you to meet the team. And, I think you got in, and they had just gone to lunch, and they came back, and everybody, first of all, they were all late.
And it was like the railroad track.
It was the railroad track. And I had given them this thing, like, you better not be late when our leadership's in town. And I was frustrated. And as a young 25-year-old, I was ready to scream at people and flip out. And, you sat me down and said, hey, it's real simple, right? Like, you can still be authentic and be yourself while having clear expectations with the team and holding people accountable. And I just remember in that moment, I had a very simple conversation around expectations. And ultimately from there, it was like, hey, they got the message and they knew they were going to be accountable. And it changed the whole direction of that summer, right? It led to a team that was together. They understood what they needed to do, not just being on time. There was a number of other things that we addressed that day. But ultimately, it changed the shape of that summer, which impacted my whole career, and I wanted to thank you for that.
Well, it was my pleasure, and the way you handled it, right? We could have very easily got off the deep end and yelled and screamed, but it's I remember the railroad track, and we asked them why they were late. It was a railroad track. Oh, okay. Well, what could we have done?
Yeah.
Well, how long does it take for the train to go by? 10 minutes. Well, you got to anticipate that there'll be a train, and you were great, and that was such a good team. Because you set the expectations right from the beginning.
Well, I think about like my leadership style. That has allowed me something as simple as setting clear expectations and how you go about delivering that message. I mean, to me, that is something that's impacted my entire career because I'm able to be authentic. I'm still able to be friendly. I'm able to have, be who I want to be while still getting what I need to get out of my team and my people. Without having to be aggressive or anything like that. What do you remember about that summer?
Wow. First of all, how much fun it could be. So if you think about, hey, we created an internship program and we were going door to door with young adults in high school selling a new product to people, right? And I remember just how we were making things up on the fly, right?
Yeah.
Like we thought we were just going in to sell these products. It was a home security product.
Yeah.
And the thing was that customers already had 2 or 3 other products with us, and they didn't want, one contract with these products and they wanted to, and your team was one of the first ones that said, hey, we have to be able to repackage these folks or we're not going to sell anything. Right. And we were able to do that. And we wrote our own playbook, and, it's incredibly fulfilling when someone who has never sold anything in their life and you go and you take them through a quick training program and all of a sudden they're selling numbers. And in some cases, your team was selling more than the veteran, folks at our companies were selling. So it was super cool.
Kind of what you mentioned about the team and the culture and going out together every day and trying to accomplish that goal. And I think we ended the summer getting to fly. It was actually the college interns.
That's right.
From a lot of the different universities, but we ended up actually getting to fly those kids out to Philadelphia to come talk about this experience. And they took a lot of the ideas that we generated that summer and applied them to our marketing across the company. And next thing you know, we went from having 20,000 subscribers to a couple million.
That's right.
Like that.
Yep.
Which was awesome to really be a part of. One, if elected, what are 2 things that you plan to prioritize?
That's one of the things that the military and business has led me to understand is you can't try to do 10 things, right? You can talk about 10 things and, hey, people want to know what your positions are on those. But if you try to do 10 things, if you're lucky to do any of them, they're not going to be great. They're going to be watered down. So I'm really focused on 2 things. And as I went and talked to people, it kind of crystallized. One was ending child hunger and poverty as we know it. And the way I plan on doing that is instituting a wealth tax on the top 1% to generate $1 trillion in revenue and give what I call a Robin Hood end poverty dividend to about 37% of Marylanders and Americans. In Maryland, it would be if a household makes $60,000 or below, each adult will get a $1,000 check every month. And that's going to help pay for rent, as you know, that's skyrocketing, food, inflation. You want to start a business, whatever you want, you take care of your children, take care of your family, and level the playing field, right? People talk about social inequality and social injustice. Well, we've got a lot of economic inequality in this country. And until we start bridging that gap, we're going to continue to have a lot of these foundational problems. And so that's number 1. And number 2, we view healthcare as a human right. It's a human dignity. And everyone from cradle to end of life should have the ability to have great preventive care, to have a dentist and get a checkup twice a year, right? To not worry about having to pay for food or their prescription drug that's going to improve their quality of life. We think those 2 things will immensely improve the quality of life of millions of Marylanders, millions of Americans. And when people have dignity and when people don't have to worry about their next bill, I think a lot of other problems start going away.
Tell me a little bit more about the wealth tax. That sounds pretty controversial, and just want to understand, how do you plan to get that passed?
How we plan on getting that passed is, number 1, when you do any type of taxing, you don't need 60 votes in the Senate, right? To try to get 60 votes in this country on anything right now, as divided as it is incredibly difficult. So you can do something without boring folks through what's called budget reconciliation that happens once a year. You can tax people there. And I know that the American people are ready for a wealth tax on the top 1%. multiple studies have shown that it's got over 60% support, people from both parties, right? Now, you might say to yourself, well, why are we going after? We don't want to create class warfare. What we want is for the top 1% to pay their fair share. I'll give you a couple of examples. Over the last 40 years, the middle class has been eviscerated, and the transfer of wealth from the middle class to the top 1% over the last 40 years, conservatively, has been about $25 trillion.
Wow.
In debt has gone from working class people to the top 1%. The top 3 wealthiest Americans have more wealth than the bottom 50% of the country.
Wow.
That's a pretty incredible stat. I'll give you the last one. In today's dollars, 40 years ago, a worker in today's dollars made $30,000 a year. A CEO made $600,000 a year. Today, that same worker making $30,000, how much do you think the average CEO makes?
500?
$10 million.
The average?
The average CEO's compensation. So we went from 30 to 600,000, right? To 30,000.
Sorry, CEO.
10 million. CEO. Yeah.
Wow.
30,000 to 10 million.
Wow.
So that is an incredible disparity, right? And that's why I think when the gap between the haves and the have-nots gets too big, usually things don't end well for that country. And I'd love to see our democracy thrive for the next 250 years.
Yeah.
So where's that money going to go to? So we call our tax plan the Robin Hood End Poverty Wealth Tax, right? So we're going to put a wealth tax on the top 1% to end poverty. And the $1,000 that we give to every adult over 18 in Maryland, where the household income is $60,000 or less, is called the Robin Hood End Poverty Dividend. So it's a dividend to people that are working hard at $15 an hour or working hard at less than a living wage, and we're going to help them pay their rent. We're going to help them put food on the table for our youth. And you know what? If they want to start a business to help their economic lot in life, they can do that too. But it's really redistributing that wealth back to the working and the middle class and for folks that are hurting. And I think most people think that's fair. In fact, I'll tell you a quick story. I talk to hundreds of people a day. We make a lot of phone calls. And 1 out of 100 people will be that top 1%.
Yeah.
And many of them say, you know what, you're right. If you're going to tax me to help make this country better, I'll pay that wealth tax.
I wanted to ask you about a tweet that I saw recently that you sent. And my youngest daughter is Latina. And I think the tweet called out that Latino women, is it in America or Maryland, that are earning?
In Maryland, and
Okay.
it's a microcosm of America, right?
Okay. So Latino women are earning 54% of every dollar that a white man would. And to me, it was just, caught my attention instantly thinking of my daughter. And I just want to ask you, how would you address that?
We need to really have a conversation, particularly with publicly traded companies, because what happens is many women leave the workforce to have children, and then they come back. Now, we get into this habit of, okay, well, this person's been here longer, so they'll get paid more for the same job description, same job title. And so immediately that gap happens and it continues to separate over time. It's hard to make that gap up. And listen, we need to pay people based on the quality of the work they do and not necessarily the time that they've been in a role. And then the same thing, there's a lot of unconscious bias that people have when folks are a minority or a person of color. And sometimes they think that those people will accept less, right? Like you're doing them a favor. And we need to work on that as a state and as a country to close that's another, income inequality gap.
One of my closest childhood friends that recently passed away and due to the opioid epidemic.
And I'm sorry about that.
I appreciate that. And, I've returned back to Oregon and spending time in Portland. There's a lot going on, obviously, in our inner cities. I just want to understand, what would be your plan for addressing the opioid epidemic?
I think there's 2 things that you can do, right? One is you can say, hey, we're going to deploy the U.S. military into Mexico and Central America and root this all out, right? I think we've tried that, right? We've had the war on drugs since Ronald Reagan was the president. And it's incredibly difficult to snuff out, but why do people go into that trade? For the profits, right? So I know it sounds radical, but I think there's a lot of work that's been done on just legalizing drugs. And so You're going to have less incarceration because people that carry or with intent to distribute, right? You're not sending those folks. I think people that are going to take drugs are going to take drugs. Just because you legalize it doesn't mean, I think that folks like you and I, right? We know what the dangers are. We have children. And so I don't think it's going to increase the number of people that are on drugs, but I think you can eliminate that profit. And that's going to mean that police and law enforcement spends less on those types of things. They can spend more on helping communities in other ways. It's really going to help a lot of our cities and inner cities to cut down on violence, cut down on waste, cut down on fraud. And as radical as that sounds, I think we have to try radical things to eliminate these drug and opioid crisis.
Yeah.
And it might be time to try that in a city or two in a pilot and see how it goes.
And I think, obviously those types of changes could bring their own types of challenges.
Absolutely.
And we've seen a lot of that in Portland, just with our downtown area. The legalizing it, not so much the issue, but it's attracting, a lot of people to these places where I used to take my kids and spend time. And so now we're trying to figure out how do we manage that aspect of it.
Right.
But obviously there's been a lot of good success with the legalization of marijuana and kind of how that went. So Juan, obviously, fatherhood is a very important topic to me and something I hold near and dear to the heart. I'd love to just ask you, what advice do you have for young dads? And that's something I'm asking everyone that I look up to.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that compliment. I would say, so I had children later in life, right? And whether it's young dad, older dad, middle dad, I would say that just cherish that time. It goes by so fast. When I think of my first son, Savan, I adopted him when he was 4 or 5. And to think that he's 19 now and he just graduated from Coast Guard basic training, I'm like, where did the time go, right? And then my little one, I remember, him, Marcellus, as an infant. And now he's, now there's times when he doesn't want to talk to me, right? That we're like cringy as parents, particularly when he's around our friend. And I know he'll grow out of that. But man, it was just, that whole experience is such a joy. And I think, not putting your baggage on your kids is incredibly important, right? We all have our character flaws and our things that, we're not necessarily great at. Don't let that impact how you raise your kids, because they deserve kind of a fresh start, and hopefully they'll lose a kind of some of the things that are our worst flaws, and they will gain all of the things that are our best traits.
What's one thing that most people don't know about you?
You never had the pleasure. I am an incredible karaokeist. I don't know if that's a word.
Yeah.
But if I stay in my register, I can kill. Wow. I can kill karaoke.
I never saw that. It's funny you mention that too, because we just got done filming an episode with a guy that I went to Vietnam with, and we talked about me karaokeing at his wedding. And I don't. First of all, I'm not good at karaoke, but they would always bring me a flower after every time, and that was a big part of our trip. So maybe sometime we'll have to get together.
I think we'd have a blast doing karaoke.
We'll see. Yeah. So, nowadays, I don't know, but one thing I thought that's interesting in the States, when you go, like in Vietnam, for example, they have these karaoke places where you rent these private rooms.
Wow.
They're really nice, and people just go hang out, and they bring food out to you. And they're starting to pop up in the States a little bit, and I thought it was an interesting idea.
It sounds like a great idea. It sounds like a lot of fun, and I'd probably dump a lot of money into one of those places.
Yeah. Final question here, man. Obviously, as a good friend of mine, I want to see you be successful and want to plug you a little bit here. How can people support you?
I would say the first thing that anyone can do is follow us on social media at Juan for Maryland. That's all of our social media platforms. That would be a huge help, because that helps us to magnify our message. And then second, our website is juanformaryland.com, and that's my first name, FOR, Maryland spelled out, .com. And, we are an insurgent grassroots campaign. I'm not a career politician. Although we've done pretty well raising money, we're up against folks that have large PACs, super PACs, and donors in Martha's Vineyard. We don't have donors in Martha's Vineyard, but we have you. If you can help us with a $5 donation, a $25 donation, whatever you feel you can afford to help us grow this movement and end child hunger and poverty in this country as we know it, not in 5 or 10 years, but in a year, we would really appreciate that.
Well, I'll tell you, I wish I lived here so I could vote for you. I did wear my Orioles jersey, though. I don't know if I told you this, but Jeremy Guthrie pitched for the Orioles. I was his ball boy when he was in high school and ended up getting to see him throw in the World Series.
That's
So
amazing.
I'll have to tweet him and see if I can get his attention or something.
That's super cool. That's super cool.
But I just want to tell you again, thank you so much for coming on our show. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share. We're looking forward to having more interesting guests on the future. And Juan, I just appreciate your friendship and everything that you're doing.
As do I, my friend. As do I. Thank you for having me. This was awesome.